This fourth video will show you how to shift, end and continue a supply scenario. In the introduction video, I briefly discussed the three following use cases: shift, end and continue a supply scenario. I mentioned that it was possible to shift a supply scenario. This functionality is useful when the start date of a contract should be postponed. I have also introduced the functionality that allows to end a supply scenario. This will basically stop a contract and create a move-out document. And finally, I mentioned the possibility to implement a functionality in order to continue an ended contract. During the demo in the system, I will apply those three functionalities in a row to one single POD. Let's jump into the system. Let's begin with a shift supply scenario. In order to shift a supply scenario, I need a point of delivery for which a supply scenario has been activated. As already said, the point of delivery remains the central object in all supply scenario processes. Let's have a look to the POD I used during the first demo. If you remind well, I applied supply scenario 10 to that POD in order to build up a single contract model. In order to display the POD, I enter transaction EEDM11 display POD. I select the POD. To do this, I click on the POD tab in Select Object part of the screen. I enter the POD ID. The POD that will be used in this demo is called ttrade1. The POD will be displayed below. I double-click on it. The POD is displayed on the right side of the screen. The interesting data for the purpose of this demo is located in the Supply Scenario tab. The Supply Scenario 10 is valid as of the 1st of January 2014. If I click on the billable contract and go to the third tab, I also see that the move-in document was created on the 1st of January 2014. If I go one step back and select the non-billable service, I get the same result. If for any reason I have to postpone the start date of the supply scenario and indirectly postpone the start date of the move-in, I have to use the shift supply scenario process. Again, this has to be done via the Customer Interaction Center. I will close this interaction using /n and open the Customer Interaction Center using CICO transaction code in the command field. I'm in the Customer Interaction Center. As mentioned in the previous videos, I can retrieve all processes related to the supply scenario in the Deregulation tab. To shift or postpone the start date of a supply scenario, I have to use the Shift Supply Scenario process. Let's click on this process. The data to input in this process is really limited. It is limited to two fields. One will identify the POD on which the action should take place, and the other will be used to identify the new start date of the supply scenario that has already been assigned to the POD. I fill in the POD ID with ttrade1 and enter a new start date, for instance the 15th of February. I execute the transaction. As a result, I receive the message Supply Scenario 10 successfully moved to point of delivery ttrade1. Let's go back to our POD to discover what happened. I call transaction EEDM11 again and select the POD ttrade1. The interesting part is again in the Supply Scenario tab. Please note that the start date has been changed to the 15th of February 2014 as expected. If I click on the billable contract reference in order to display the contract, and if I go to the third tab, I see that the move-in date has also been postponed to the 15th of February 2014. If I go one step back and if I display the non-billable services, I find out a postponed start date as well. This completes the first use case. Imagine now that the business partner wants to move out. In this case, I have to put an end date to the supply scenario situation and to the contracts. For this example, let's again use the same POD. In order to end a contract, I should use the End Supply Scenario process. This process can again be called from the Deregulation tab in the Customer Interaction Center. Let's call transaction code CICO PO and use the process. The principle is the same as for the shift supply scenario process. I enter the POD ID of the POD on which I want to take the action, and I mention the end date of the supply scenario. The business partner wants to move out on the 1st of April 2014. We execute. As a result of the process, I receive the message supply scenario 10 ended for point of delivery T-Trade 1. Let's check what happened to the POD. Again, I call transaction code EEDM11 and I display POD T-Trade 1. Let's check the supply scenario tab. The color of the lines has changed. This color means that the supply scenario is no more active on the date I selected on the left side of the screen. By default, it's today's date. I see also that the end date has been changed from the infinite to the 1st of April 2014. The contract has been updated with the move out date as well. The end date of the non-billable services has also been updated. This ends the second case of this demo. Let's start the third and last case. Actually, the business partner doesn't want to move out anymore, but I already ended the supply scenario. In this case, I have to continue the supply scenario. Let's go again to the Customer Interaction Center. As you can see in the Deregulation tab, no supply scenario process exists to continue an ended contract. Nevertheless, I can easily configure one using the standard method Continue Supply Scenario. This is what has been done in our system. Let's now execute the Continue Supply Scenario process. I still have two fields to enter, the POD on which an action needs to be taken and the start date. In this case, the start date needs to fit to the end date previously applied to this POD. Let's execute. As outcome of the transaction, I received the message, Supply Scenario 10 was continued successfully for POD T-Trade 1. I quickly check what happened to the POD. I enter transaction code /NEEDM11 and display the POD. I select the Supply Scenario tab and I see immediately that the color of the lines is changed again. This color means that the supply scenario is again active. You can check it thanks to the end date, which is the infinite. I click now on the billable contract and go to the third tab. I can see that the move out date has disappeared. The move out document has been reversed. The end date of the non-billable services has been updated in the meantime. This last use case is probably less useful than the first two ones of this demo. This last use case was aimed to show the flexibility of the solution while remaining in the standard customizing. This ends the third demo and fourth video about the supply scenario. Thank you for your attention.